Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Thank you for dealing with my bad singing. But I've heard this song, Wade in the Water, more times than I can count. When I was a little girl, I remember looking up as the adults sang. Some of them would have their eyes closed, while others would have their hands and faces raised to the sky, almost as if they were praying. I understood, even as a child, that there was something important about this song and the many other songs that we sang. I would come to learn that these songs were sacred. They went hand in hand with our stories, our oral history, which is also incredibly sacred to us. So thank you so much for having me today and allowing me the space to tell our story. While preparing for this presentation, I came across the Sankofa bird. My prima and my dear friend, Karina Toralba, who is sitting in the back there, she's also the treasurer of our organization. And she's the one who said that we are Sankofa birds. We'd seen the most beautiful paintings and sculptures of the Sadinkra symbol at an art gallery while we were in Beaufort, South Carolina, just over a year ago. And the meaning resonated with us deeply. The Sankofa symbol is from the Akan people of West Africa. Sankofa is expressed in the Twi language as Se Wower Fana Wa Sankofa Ayenke. Literally translated, this means, it is not taboo to go back and fetch what you forgot. It is symbolized as a mythological, mythical bird with its feet firmly placed forward, with its head turned backward with an egg, and you can see the little egg there, which symbolizes the future in its mouth. It is this wisdom and learning from the past that ensures a strong future. It also means that it is never too late to turn around and start on a new path. Chief Louis Johnson and Mr. Richard Ellinger, I would like to say thank you for coming back and fetching us. Your kindness and hospitality have made us feel like we're returning home and being welcomed in with the most loving and caring arms. So thank you so much to both of you. All I want right now is each day for one more person to learn our history. This was stated by Ms. Charles Emily Wilson, who is the founder of the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association, as quoted in Our Land Before We Die by Jeff Gwynn. And it is my honor to share this history of the Seminoles with you today. Our story, in my humble opinion, is a truly and uniquely American story. One of my favorite quotes is by the legendary filmmaker Haile Gerima, who said, "Many enslaved Africans did not wait for Lincoln to free them." And this is true. For many of our enslaved African forebears, as soon as they realized that their freedom was being taken from them, they began searching for ways to get it back. We know and have heard about the many lives lost to sea during these numerous and harrowing voyages on slave ships. And if they survived that journey, as soon as their feet touched this unknown land, many Africans began resisting, fighting, and running. They ran until they found refuge. La Florida. When the Spanish first arrived in Florida, there were, of course, already indigenous inhabitants living there. The idea was for these indigenous peoples to be forced into helping the Spanish protect their claim to this land. Unfortunately, contact with the Spaniards brought disease, and many of these early Native Americans succumbed to these illnesses. In addition, numerous attacks from these early European settlers brought about more death. Within a short amount of time, those original inhabitants were all but wiped out. Following the near decimation of these early Floridian inhabitants, enslaved Africans, free blacks, and other Native American tribes were encouraged to seek refuge in Florida by Spanish authorities. It is believed that enslaved Africans had been finding freedom in Spanish Florida from as early as 1689. The Low Country region of the United States. The majority of these formerly enslaved Africans, or Maroons, were Gullah, Geechee, or Gullah Geechees, who were freeing themselves from an area known as the Low Country region of the United States, or more specifically, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and northern Florida. Even though the group was enslaved, they lived in relative isolation from their white captors for long periods of time. This allowed this group of Africans from various parts of Central and Western Africa to develop their own culture, which included their own language, which is an English-based Creole known as Gullah Geechee or Gullah Geechee. And we'll discuss that a little more later on. Initially, the Maroons lived apart from the Seminoles, who were primarily a small group of Creeks who had separated from a larger group of Creeks because of a growing number of cultural and moral differences. There were also other tribes that would eventually join this group that would become known as the Seminoles. Linguists believe the word Seminole comes from the Muskogee word Seminole. This word Seminole may have been adapted from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning runaway or wild one. And it's also believed that the word maroon also came from this word cimarron as well. By the early 19th century, the Maroons, who had established themselves as corn and rice farmers, and the Seminoles were in regular contact with each other. Some Seminoles did practice slavery, but it was not the brutal chattel slavery that was practiced by white Southern slave owners, but it was slavery nonetheless. In some cases, it was closer to a feudal taxation, since the Maroons typically lived in their own communities. During the 1820s, there were about 800 Maroons living among approximately 4,000 Seminoles. And historians point out that these Maroon settlements, which were often located on the outskirts of Seminole settlements, were highly militarized. In exchange for an annual tribute of livestock, crops, hunting, and war party obligations, Maroons found sanctuary among the Seminoles, who in turn acquired an important strategic ally in a sparsely populated region. The Maroons elected their own leaders and could amass wealth in cattle and crops. Most importantly, they bore arms for self-defense. Florida real estate records show that the Seminoles and Maroons owned large quantities of Florida land. Following the War of 1812, and just ahead of the Seminole Wars, the Maroon community became known as the Black Seminoles. They were also called Seminole Negroes by their white American enemies, and Estelusti, which means black people, by their Native American allies. The Seminole Wars. The Seminole Wars were efforts by the United States to remove the Seminoles and Black Seminoles from Florida, and there were three distinct wars. The First Seminole War. Successfully winning independence in the Revolution emboldened American slaveholders, who now turned their attention to armed black communities in La Florida. After switching from Spanish control to British, it was now under Spanish control again. This, however, did not stop the United States from seeking to capture and return so-called black fugitives under the Treaty of New York of 1790. This was the first treaty ratified under the Confederation. And after the War of 1812, General Andrew Jackson attacked Negro Fort. He did this because he wanted to disrupt the Black Seminoles, who had set up communities in Florida. He would go on to lead excursions into La Florida, ignoring the protests of both the Spanish and the British. During the First Seminole War, which took place from approximately 1816 to 1819, breaking up these Black Seminole communities was one of Jackson's main objectives. Unfortunately, Spain was unable to protect its territory, so La Florida was eventually ceded to the United States per the Adams-Oney Treaty of 1819. In 1821, the official transfer took place. According to the terms of the 1823 Treaty of Moultrie Creek, between the United States and the Seminole Nation, the Seminoles and Black Seminoles were removed from northern Florida to a reservation in the center of the Florida Peninsula, and the U.S. constructed a series of forts and trading posts along the Gulf and Atlantic coast to enforce the treaty. These initial efforts by the Americans forced the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles to move further into Florida, particularly central and southern Florida. And several Black Seminoles continued south, leaving Florida altogether and finding a home in the Bahamas. There's still a community of Black Seminoles in the Bahamas today, in the town of Red Bays. The Second Seminole War. The Second Seminole War, which took place from 1835 to 1842, marked the height of tension between the U.S. and the Seminoles. It also marked the apex of the Seminole-Black Seminole Alliance. The Second Seminole War began when the United States violated the Treaty of Moultrie Creek and instead demanded that the Seminoles and Black Seminoles move to Indian Territory, pursuant to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. In councils before the war, the Black Seminoles threw their support behind the most militant Seminole faction, which was led by Osceola, who was also known as Billy Powell, who became an advisor to Micanopy, who was the principal chief of the Seminoles from 1825 to 1849. Osceola led the Seminole resistance to removal until he was captured on October 21, 1837. He and Micanopy were captured under a truce. Within a few months, Osceola would die in captivity of either an intestinal infection or malaria. After the war broke out, Black Seminole leaders such as John Caesar, Abraham, who's pictured here, and John Horace played important roles. In addition to aiding the Seminoles in their fight, the Black Seminoles recruited enslaved Africans to rebel at the start of the war. The enslaved Africans joined the Seminoles and Black Seminoles in the destruction of 21 sugar plantations between Christmas Day 1835 and the summer of 1836. In 1838, U.S. General Thomas Jessup tried to divide the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles by offering freedom to the Black Seminoles if they would just surrender and agree to go to Indian Territory. War-weary and truly believing that they would actually receive their freedom, John Horace was among the Black Seminole warriors who agreed to surrender under this condition. More than 500 Black Seminoles traveled with the Seminoles to present-day Oklahoma. Some traveled by ship across the Gulf of Mexico and up the Mississippi River, and others walked the Trail of Tears. The Third Seminole War. There would be a third war that was fought from 1855 to 1858. By this time, the majority of the Black Seminoles had relocated to Oklahoma. The remaining Seminoles fought valiantly to save and protect their land. After a series of battles and while facing starvation, most of the remaining Seminoles agreed to move to Indian Territory. However, an estimated 200 to 500 Seminoles remained behind, refusing to leave. They moved deeper into the Florida Everglades, onto land that American settlers considered uninhabitable. Oklahoma, a place that y'all know well, huh? Around 1838, Black Seminoles began to arrive in Oklahoma, but many did not find a home here. Instead, they found that they had been placed in a volatile and hostile environment. They would have to contend with their old enemies, the Creeks, who were their neighbors, who often vandalized and destroyed their property. And they also had to deal with the constant threat of slave catchers who had free reign in the territory and could enslave anyone who they believed fit the description of a so-called fugitive slave. Under the leadership of Wildcat, who was the leader of the Seminoles, and John Horace, who was the leader of the Black Seminoles, several of them decided to leave. Mexico. After an arduous 700-mile journey, the Black Seminoles and their Seminole brethren arrived in Mexico, where slavery had been abolished since 1829, ready to protect the Mexican border. In return for protecting the border, the Mexican government granted the group their own land. The Black Seminole settlement was located in the northern part of Mexico, and the name of this land that they could finally call their own was El Nacimiento de los Negros. Negros Mascogos is what Black Seminoles are called in Spanish. Although the Black Seminoles made the arduous trek with the group of Seminoles, the untimely death of their little wildcat prompted many of the Seminoles to return to Indian Territory. And for the next 20 years, from 1850 to 1870, the Black Seminoles would serve the Mexican government, protecting their land from invaders and raiding parties from Texas. They would become known as resilient, resourceful, and dependable fighters. Texas. During their military service, the Black Seminoles who joined the Army would come to be known as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. They served from 1870 to 1914 and were instrumental during the Texas Indian Wars. The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. In 1870, the United States Army issued a message to John Horse, the chief of the Black Seminoles. They invited him and his people to come back to the U.S. to enlist as Indian Scouts to help fight the quote-unquote hostile Native Americans. In exchange for their service, they would be repatriated to Indian Territory. The Black Seminoles accepted this invitation because they believed that they would be granted land, food, and other provisions, as well as reimbursement for their travel. The treaty was sent to Fort Duncan, from Fort Duncan to Fort Sam Houston, but it was lost. So needless to say, none of these promises were ever kept.
Right.
The initial group first crossed over into Eagle Pass, Texas from Mexico on July 4th, 1870. And they were officially mustered into service on August 16th of the same year at Fort Duncan. The Scouts were moved to Fort Clark in Brackettville, Texas, which is about 60 miles away from Eagle Pass, in 1870. Their heyday was under the command of Quaker and Civil War veteran Lieutenant John L. Bullis. He and the Scouts enjoyed a relationship of mutual respect, trust, and admiration. During their service, not a single Scout was killed or seriously injured. 4 of the Scouts were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for bravery. They were Adam Payne, Isaac Payne, John Ward, and Pompey Factor. Adam Payne received his award following an engagement during the Red River War that took place on September 19, 1874. 3 Seminole Negro Indian Scouts and 2 Tonkawa Scouts had been sent out by their commander, Colonel Randall S. McKenzie, to search for enemies. During their journey, the 5 men were ambushed by 40 Kiowas. The only option was to try and fight their way out and escape. While details about the engagement are unclear, Scout Adam Payne was awarded the Medal of Honor for risking his life to save his fellow comrades. Under fire, Payne engaged the Kiowas, allowing the other 4 men to get away. Payne's horse was shot out from under him, but he was able to kill one of his attackers and take his horse. Payne was decorated for his habitual courage. And John Ward, Isaac Payne, and Pompey Factor received their Medals of Honor in 1875 for their bravery and trustworthiness. During a skirmish on April 25th against Comanches, who had raided a stagecoach on April 5th and stolen some horses. The 3 Seminole Negro Indian Scouts were with Lieutenant Bullis. They were trying to locate the Comanches who were camping along the lower Pecos River. A battle ensued when they found the Comanches. The Scouts dismounted and positioned themselves behind some rocks to appear as a bigger force. According to Bullis's report, we twice took their horses from them and killed 3 Indians and wounded a 4th. But the approximately 30 Comanches eventually realized that the group was small and attempted to surround them in order to cut them off from their horses. The 3 Scouts made it to their horses, but as they made their way back to safely, they realized that Lieutenant Bullis had been left behind. Without a second thought, and while under heavy fire, they turned around and rescued their commander. Even given these exploits, back in town, in Brackettville, and around the fort, the men and their families faced racism and other harsh conditions. They were often accused of stealing and other crimes. They would often flee to Mexico for refuge, and they would only return when the heat had died down. Chief John Horse, who referred to his people as pure colored Seminoles, felt the need to express his unhappiness about the plight of his people. Because he couldn't write, the following letter was dictated to General C.C. Augur. It was written in 1873, and it read, "You are the head here, father and mother to us Seminoles. I came here this day to see you, in behalf of my people, and I hope that what I ask here in writing, you will please grant us. I am born in Florida. My people were taken from here and brought to Arkansas. Everything was taken from us when we left Florida. Houses, cattle, horses, everything what we had. And the government pledged itself at that time to pay us for all the losses, and that we should get land for a home and be furnished with everything for 8 years. This was in the President Polk's time. And since that time, we have been roaming about without a home, and nothing has been done for us. And we now ask the government to give us a home for the sake of our children, that we may learn something and get schooling, where we can believe in God and love each other." Even under these conditions and under constant scrutiny, the men continue to serve bravely and valiantly. In 1878, Colonel Ronald S. McKenzie was recalled to the fort in order to lead an expedition against the Kickapoo. This campaign effectively marked the end of the Texas Indian Wars. Most of the indigenous inhabitants of the area had either been killed or moved to reservations. On February 23, 1893, the scouts fought one last skirmish against Mexican bandits at Las Moises Ranch, 30 miles north of Fort Reingold in Starr County. And the Seminoles continued to live on the fort until 1914. When they were disbanded, some returned to Mexico, but many stayed in Brackettville, while some others moved to Oklahoma, where the Seminole Nation was granted sovereignty. And still others remained, buried in the Scout Cemetery, which was established in 1872. Among those buried there are the 4 scouts who earned the Congressional Medal of Honor: Adam Payne, Isaac Payne, John Ward, and Pompey Factor. While it is a historical landmark, the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery is a sacred space for us. For many of us, multiple family members and dear friends are buried there. And this is the entrance sign to the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery. And for many years, the cemetery was the only place that was ours. So as a group, we have always made sure to keep the cemetery clean and inviting for those who visit. We gather there once a year during our Seminole Day celebration to honor the memories of those who have passed. Carver School Grounds. When Fort Clark Seminole Negro Indian Scout Detachment was disbanded by the U.S. Army on September 30th, 1914, many of the Black Seminoles relocated to Brackettville, which was literally just across the street. They held school in their church until new grounds were purchased by the Brackett Independent School District in March of 1919 from J.F. Maddox for the purpose of providing a site for the quote-unquote colored school for Brackettville's Seminole Negro community. The old Maddox Homestead, a 2-story limestone structure built in 1870, served as the building for the school, which was named George Washington Carver School. The first floor was used for classrooms, while the second floor was leased to the Black Masonic Lodge until 1923. In 1930, the structure was condemned as unfit and unsafe for school purposes. The second story of the building was thus removed in 1944, and the first floor was remodeled inside and stuccoed on the outside. The building was again used as classrooms for the primary and elementary grades, while high school classes were conducted in another building completed in early 1944 by the 162nd Engineer Squadron of the 2nd Cavalry Division, which was then stationed at Fort Clark. So this is the second building that was built. At the time, Carver School was the only accredited black school between San Antonio and El Paso. The Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association was deeded the school grounds by Brackett ISD. The original stone schoolhouse has served as a meeting hall and cultural center for Bracketville's Black Seminole community, including local Juneteenth celebrations and Seminole Days, which takes place each September. The Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association. The Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association, or SISCA, was founded in 1963 by this lovely lady here, Ms. Charles Emily Wilson, who was an educator. She would go on to be the matriarch of our community. She started our Juneteenth and Seminole Day celebrations. And SISCA's main goals are to preserve, maintain, and promote the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery, where our ancestors are buried, and to raise awareness about the 4 Medal of Honor recipients who have been laid to rest there. We are the de facto keepers of the flame of our history. Juneteenth and Seminole Days. Ms. Charles Emily Wilson began our Seminole Days and Juneteenth celebrations in the late 70s. They didn't really take off until the early 80s. Each celebration brings with it its own traditions. Juneteenth, which is now a national holiday, is the celebration of Texans who were enslaved, learning that they had been freed. It took 2 years for this news to reach the port city of Galveston, Texas. Juneteenth is also celebrated in Nacimiento in Mexico. And Seminole Days is a 3-day celebration that includes a hike to Seminole Canyon, guest lecturers, a parade, a barbecue, loteria, or what you also know as bingo, and many other activities. It feels like a big family reunion because we get to see old faces and meet new ones. This is a time for us to learn about our history and to meet new relatives. Ms. Charles' initial wish was to have something for our youth, and that has now become an institution among us. It is a much anticipated and beloved annual celebration. Negros Mas Gogos. As discussed earlier, El Nacimiento de los Negros was founded in the 1850s. More than 170 years later, the town and its residents continue to thrive. They are proud of their Black Seminole heritage. There is a pride and tenacity that seems to permeate its skies and its ground. The folks of Nacimiento are learning their history, celebrating their culture, especially their food, singing the old Negro spirituals, and taking care of their cemetery. We are connected by history and by blood, and our connection continues to strengthen and grow. The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts Museum. On April 25th, 2015, we opened our museum, and it's called the Seminole Negro Indian Scout Museum. It's small, as you can see from this picture, it's a one room, but we are so proud of it. A lot of love went into each picture and artifact that is displayed. Everything was donated by either descendants or friends of SISCA, and the museum gives us a chance to tell our story in our own way. Afro-Seminole Creole. On June 20th, 2021, we officially began revitalizing our language, which is known as Afro-Seminole Creole, or ASC for short. If you remember, I spoke earlier about the Gullahs who spoke Gullah Geechee or Gullah Geechee, which is an English-based Creole with several African loanwords. Well, they carried this language with them when they went into Florida, and then they took it with them into Oklahoma, and it went down with them to Mexico and back up into Texas. Unfortunately, there were many factors that would see the near extinction of our language by the time that I was born. There was often a lot of shame felt by those who spoke it, and there was also a lot of pressure to assimilate to the dominant culture. And as more and more elders passed away, they took the language with them. So during our first meeting, we had the pleasure of having Dr. Ian Hancock present, and his presence made all the difference. He's the linguist who has studied Afro-Seminole Creole since the late 70s. He actually came to Brackettville and got many of our elders to speak, and so he was able to document and record the language so that we have that now. And at that time, they thought it was just a broken language. But in reality, what it is a testament to the resilience and tenacity of the people who were often placed in predicaments not of their choosing. And so here are some, as it says, here are some of my favorite Afro-Seminole Creole words. So if y'all want to speak along with me, just, how many words? 6 little words that you can add to your vocabulary. So when we first started, I went through the dictionary, and I said, I don't see a word here for hello. How do you say hello? Because that's generally the first thing you want to learn if you're learning a new language. And so what I found out was hello in Afro-Seminole Creole is not just one word. It's a whole phrase. And you can be as, sassy as you want to when you say it, or you can be as brief as you want. So for hello, which is the second line, you would say, how hunna da do. If you want to repeat, you could say, how hunna da do. And if you want to just say, and that's literally, how are you doing? If you want to be brief, you can just say, how hunna. So just how hunna. And right above here, you see hunna means you. So the word hunna can mean just one you, or multiple people. So everybody, just like with English, you or you all is hunna. So the next word, which made me absolutely fall in love with this language, is the word day clean. And when I first saw that word and saw what it meant, it made me realize that this language is both incredibly practical. One thing about Creoles is they cut the fat. There's not a lot of adjectives and modifiers. Most of them are very straightforward languages. Yet there's something that's so poetic about them. And I think it's all encapsulated in this word day clean. So day clean means dawn or daybreak. And if you think about it, each day you start clean. The slate is wiped clean every day. And I just think that's so beautiful that they incorporated that into their language. The next word is just fun to say. It's chukla. Chukla, it means, actually I need to modify it. It means girlfriend, boyfriend, or sweetheart. So, it's for anybody that you love. And the reason that I like this word so much is because it's kind of a mystery. Dr. Ian isn't sure what its origins are. So it could come from a Native American language. It could be Muskogee for anybody here who speaks Muskogee. It would be called to bend your ear, later and see if you have any recollections of a word that might sound like this, that means this. I think he's pretty sure that it's not an African word, but I'll have to ask him about that. But we're thinking it's a Native American word that we just don't know the origins of. And so then, of course, just like hello, you also want to know, how do you say thank you? If I need to say thank you to somebody, how do I say it? So in Afro-Seminole Creole, the way you say thank you is very simple. You say thank you. And if you want to emphasize, and so with Creoles, you emphasize by saying the word. So if you really did something really, really nice for me, I will say thank you, thank you, thank you. I will repeat myself to let you know how appreciative I am. So you can say just thank you or thank you. And then the very last word that I think is just beautiful is the word for goodbye. So you have hello, how hunna da do, and for goodbye, which is just like day clean, it's walk good. And this is how you say goodbye. And I think it's a beautiful instruction on how to go in this life, walk good, So it's basically saying when you walk away from here, I want for you to do good. So goodbye is walk good. And I think that's just beautiful instruction on how to live your life. So in conclusion, I'd like to say We, the Black Seminoles of Texas and Mexico, are very proud of our heritage. As a unified group, we are coming together and working together to teach ourselves and others about our rich history. In both towns, our cemeteries are incredibly sacred to us. Giving our dearly departed loved ones a final resting place that is peaceful is very important. In addition, we are striving to revitalize the things that we once thought were lost. This includes our old Negro spirituals that were sung way back in the Low Country region of the US when many of the Black Seminoles were enslaved, and our language, which is Afro-Seminole Creole, that has its roots in Gullah Geechee. We are proud descendants of these people who sought freedom on their own terms, and each day we strive to make them proud. And I'd like to close with a quote from Ms. Charles. So we began with a quote by her, and I'd like to end with a quote by her. And she said, "There is great power in one. This is what I always want, that one more person should know our story." And I would like to dedicate this presentation to my mom. Her name was Darnette Darlene Goodloe Hardrick, and she passed away a year ago this month on the 3rd of February. And my mom loved family. She loved music, she loved food, she loved laughing, she loved life. And she was the most caring person that you would ever want to meet. And she loved Juneteenth. And I miss her terribly. But she lives in my heart. And she's never far from my thoughts. So I just hope that I'm making her proud. Thank you.